This just in, Apple launching a new advertisement all about privacy. Let's get to Josh Lipton in San Francisco with the details. Hey, Josh.
So, Melissa, Apple just now introducing a new commercial focused on privacy. It's going to roll out across the U.S. It's going to run through March Madness, I'm told. With this focus on privacy, what you're seeing is Apple really trying to hammer home what it sees as just a key differentiator for the company, that it sells hardware, not advertising, like Google and Facebook. And the implication being that Apple can be trusted, of course, with your data privacy. We know that's an issue that's front and center for investors and consumers. Of course, the New York Times just reported this week, interestingly, that prosecutors are conducting a criminal investigation into data deals that Facebook made with 150 companies, including Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple, though Apple will be quick to point out that its users always had to grant explicit permission before sharing photos or contacts with the social network. And by the way, more Facebook news here today. Its chief of product, Chris Cox, is leaving the company. Melissa, back to you.
All right, Josh, thanks so much. Josh Lipton in San Francisco. Okay, so is playing Apple a dangerous game, touting itself as the privacy company at the same time it's pivoting into the services business? I mean, this could sort of be a thorny issue, right? If they're collecting more and more data, they're more reliant on these services here. And right now they want to go out and be out in front as the privacy company.
Don't you think it's better to get ahead of it now, though, than 6 months to 9 months from now when it potentially is a problem? So good for them, I think, for getting in front of him. And I think, and Tim will agree with this, and Tim's been all over this, I think it puts Facebook right back in the crosshairs. And to me, Facebook is the biggest story tonight. Listen, the move from 145 when they reported earnings back in late January to 170 took a lot of people by surprise, myself included. But I still think there's huge existential risk there. Listen, valuation compelling, absolutely. Is there headline risk? Without question. And I'm one that believes the stock trades right back to the levels we saw in late January, which is give or take 150.
So, in fact, I wrote about this in an op-ed on CNBC, but 2018.
Very 2018.
The companies that use technology to help make your experience better and enable you, whether it's hardware or certainly that's Apple. I think that's Amazon. I actually think investors give a premium to those companies. I think companies that actually where technology is actually something where they're almost using us is a dynamic that I think we're facing. And Facebook's absolutely wrestling with that. I think Google is wrestling with it on a different level. We also know that Google is to me, it's an invaluable tool on the internet for many people. But the bottom line here is I think Facebook, if you look at the stock, we're around 170 on the stock. It's rallied back significantly off the floor. It's come back to a level that effectively it's stalled out at, even on a rally back off the worst of the news over the summer last year and really on their earnings announcements. And for me, this is a company in transition. It doesn't mean that their top line isn't extraordinary. It doesn't mean that it's not a great valuation. But I will go on to say that Facebook has continued to underperform tech, which has been the place to be for the last 2 years. And that's with or without some of these headlines.
Facebook underperformed in the session. It is down another 1.8%, presumably on these departures. So how important is the loss of these executives?
Listen, I think the most important thing is that we have Sheryl Sandberg and then we have Mark Zuckerberg in place. I think obviously a 10-year veteran leaving, and the way he left and that statement was very interesting. He does not seem excited about the direction which this company is going. I think Facebook has probably topped out for a little bit. The stock has, like you guys just said, had a really big run. I want to go back to that privacy statement by Apple. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. We saw Tim Cook kind of pick fights with Mark Zuckerberg at periods last year when Mark was going in front of Congress and that sort of thing. You know, let's remember that Apple is going to have multiple, like this is going to be the third consecutive year where Apple iPhone units are not growing, right? And we know that services is a really important thing, but it's also really important to have value-added services from other suppliers. Picking fights with, Facebook and Google, which pays them $12 billion a year to be the default search engine on the Safari browser on their phone. I just don't see the upside of kind of getting in there and spitting in their face a little bit to me, because they're all going to be lumped in together, and Apple needs to keep this hardware, which is not growing, something that people want to use frequently.
I was thinking the same thing. What is the upside in terms of how much do they gain in terms of customer loyalty, and or are you going to subscribe more to Apple services because you think that they are a privacy company? And will they lose, to Dan's point, will they lose some of the people who pay them money, right, that they depend on?
They could certainly lose them, but I think that if you listen to Katie Huberty, and she's one of the people who upgraded Apple today in terms of what she thinks going to the future, and talks about Apple and 197 target is the same target. But I think, Mel, it's interesting because Apple finds himself in a spot where I think Tim Cook wants to separate himself, and he wants to say, hey, look, we are the privacy place to be. And it just seems like that's up to Dan's point.
But what does he gain from it? What do you think you gain?
I think that as they build out their systems, and I think their systems are going to continue to change over the years. I mean, we all know now services is big. I mean, the services is becoming closer and closer to a 15-20% of the revenues. And now wearables. And that was the big point from Katie Huberty today, is just the incredible growth that they have in wearables right now is unbelievable. And some of the record numbers that they're putting out there. So I think with the 1.4 billion users that they've got, active devices rather, that they've got, they just want to separate themselves from the rest. And this is just one way that I think Apple can do it.
I took her note. It was all about China. I mean, they were saying that
that was part of it. There's no doubt. She talked about stabilization and the fact that the market share thing. Absolutely. And why was that? Because in January, February, the prices came down and people decided they were willing to buy.
But Apple has made a major stand a few times in the last few years, whether it's been terrorist events where we've had phones that needed to be unlocked. I mean, Apple's been out there fighting for your privacy.
Yes.
And I think there's an absolute difference in perception of how Apple is there to represent the interest not only of their clients, but the people that actually.
Hey, Mel, I got on the Facebook story, which I think is fascinating. We got the earlier story of the investigation. Suddenly the stock's down. But it's only down 2%, give or take, during the day, a little less than 2%. Now you're down another, call it 2%. And it's interesting. If you go back to January, Zuckerberg has been butting heads with that group at WhatsApp since I don't know how far back, but he was very vocal about it in January. He said he did not want the ecosystems to all be one. And that's the fight that he got from the chief officer as well as the VP. So the fact that they're leaving, I kind of wonder, is that the reason?
This is a 10-year veteran of Facebook. This guy is buddies with Zuckerberg.
He might be buddies, but they have totally different views on how they ought to do this.
All of a sudden they do. This year they do. Right. This is the story. It's not that the WhatsApp guy who cashed out for $19 billion 5 years ago left in a huff this year because he didn't like what they did to it.
I think these guys are leaving in a huff.
Lockstep with Zuckerberg right up until
he was until the fact that he wants to mesh these systems and the folks. Let's be honest. We all know, is Instagram the same people as Facebook? Really not, right? I mean, Instagram
users.
Those are the same folks that are actually Snap competitors, right? I mean, each one of these silos has competition, and because of different types of folks.
So you think it's a bad sign?
Oh, I don't think it's a bad sign. I think this
is
Zuckerberg saying, hey, you know what? You guys are stuck. You think we should get all these systems together? I don't want to do that. So let's part ways, and it's all good.
So it smooths the way for this integration.
Yes.
If you believe that is the right thing to do.
Yeah. So back to Apple now. So we're going back and forth. You know, we make fun of me almost every night because I'm getting older. And when you get to be my age,
what time is it?
When you're not here, we make fun of you.
We haven't made fun of you so far.
It's 88
minutes. This is a record. This is actually making fun of you, though.
But you know what you do at my age often? You go to the doctor. Why do you bring that up, Guy? I'm glad you asked, Mel, because, you know, maybe Apple getting in front of the whole. I mean, if they're going to get into the medical side of things in a major way, this is an interesting way to get ahead of all the privacy concerns that are going to come with the wearables and the HIPAA laws and what have you. So maybe there's some genius in there.
Right. What does being the privacy company get Apple in terms of valuation? From an investor standpoint, what do you gain from Apple going out there saying we are the privacy company?
Well, first of all, I think it keeps people a lot more loyal when it comes to refresh, and there's an enormous amount of competition in handsets that are much, much cheaper. So first of all, I think that's very clear. But services business is where you get the multiple, right? So that is where we're trying to figure out, should Apple be trading at 12 times? Should it be trading at 16 times? In fact, you should probably be breaking up your multiple in two different pieces.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the street is now doing. So I think when it comes to services, we've raised the valid point, which is that Apple is trying to make this why you go to Apple and stay within the ecosystem, and I think that deserves a multiple.
I would just add that the only people that really care about privacy are the regulators. Advertisers don't care and users don't care. They've shown us that. When this stock got cratered last year, 35%, peak to trough, they didn't lose advertisers. They barely lost active users. So, I mean, really, this is something that I think the regulators are very interested in. Investors, not yet.
Well, I think the key element for me is this whole retention idea, and I think Tim's exactly right. Why are they willing to, and everybody always asks this question, why am I going to buy the Apple phone versus this phone? I think a lot of that has to do with who Apple is and what they stand for, and the fact that they separate themselves away from the crowd. Because of that, there's a lot of different reasons, but when you look at retention, it's 92+% for Apple phones. I mean, that says a lot, right?
Also, I mean, let's just let the market decides. So, I mean, what we said, Facebook's traded cheap for 2-3 years. Whatever you want to call this, everyone says, oh, it's so cheap. Guess what? It's cheap for a reason. So is probably Google. I mean, the market is voting with a multiple on these companies that are
discount for the privacy issue.
Of course they are, because they can't even solve them. So that's what people do, and I think investors have been right to do that.
Does Apple have a multiple premium? And it doesn't. I mean, most people would say that it's cheap, including cash. But does Apple gain anything in their valuation because they're a privacy company? I mean, if the reverse is true, I'm just wondering.
Can we just talk about one thing? So what is Zuckerberg trying to do? He's trying to put these together. He's trying to be like WeChat, where in China now, and they've shown us by slowing iPhone sales there, they have less than 10% market share. You know, they want to be a value-added software platform, not really caring, being agnostic to the hardware for all intents and purposes. So to me, I actually think that's really the most important takeaway of the last couple of weeks. I think Zuckerberg, they tried hardware once. It never really worked. They're going their own route here. And I don't think they really care going forward where you use their services, because it's going to be this kind of closed garden for them.